Welcome to this first of two videos where I believe I have found the fastest way to bond the topside battens. While I had several days of prep, the majority of the work was completed in 2 days with the help of an old friend. By some accounts, 1755 years old. Brian Warzella and I worked for 2 solid days, cutting the remaining 112 notches and attaching the remaining 8 topside battens. But as every parent knows, Santa's big day requires a lot of preparation. To save time, I purchased the 12-foot long, 1.5 inch wide by 5/8 inch thick battens, pre-cut from the lumberyard. And then I routed a 1/4 inch round on the two inside edges of the batten. To make 28-foot battens, I cut the boards to length and then made scarf joints to put 3 pieces together. Before I could bond the scarf joints, I needed to clean up the garage.
So now that I have all of the batten scarf joints cut, I'm gonna bond them together with first unthickened and then thickened epoxy. I use this jig as I've done before to make sure they're parallel, and then I'm gonna attach them with the Raptor plastic brads. So that's what I'll be doing now. And this is just lightly thickened epoxy with, I use a high density filler and some mahogany sawdust in here just to make it match a little bit better. So I think it will hide my joints a little bit better. You don't need a lot of it in here. Again, I'm using the Omar nailer with some Raptor plastic brads. This one is done. And the beauty of using the brads and the clamps is that I can then move on and do multiples of these.
As an aspiring boat builder and YouTube influencer, I am very proud to say that I have my first sponsor. Utility Composites out of Texas sent me this Raptor composite fasteners hat and some redwood and cedar colored fasteners. Merry Christmas to me! I plan to use the colored fasteners as I make scarf joints for the planking. For me, these Raptor composite fasteners are indispensable because I don't have enough clamps for all 8 of these topside battens. But as you'll see in the future, there's parts of the boat that you just can't put a clamp on, like when I plank the bottom and the sides of the boat. So I'll be using the composite fasteners to hold the planks in place while the epoxy cures.
Okay, so I scarf jointed and bonded the 8 battens that are remaining to complete both sides of the boat. So now that I have the upper and lowermost topside battens installed, I'm going to put 4 more battens equally spaced on each frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure from the top of the lowermost batten to the top of the uppermost batten, and I get right about 22.5 inches. So if you take 22.5 inches, you're going to want to divide it by 5, because while you have 4 boards, there's actually 5 spaces. So 22.5 divided by 5 is 4.5 inches. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come from here and I'm going to measure and mark 4.5, 9, 13.5, 18, and then you get to the 22.5. So that's going to be the upper of each of these battens. Each of these is 1.5 inches. So instead of it being, so if you're at 4.5 and each batten can be 1.5 inches, the bottom is at 6. And from 9, the next bottom of the batten is going to be at 10.5. From 13.5, you go to 15. And from 18, you go to 19.5. And then if you go ahead and measure from that bottom to there, you get about 4.5 inches. So what's going to happen is I need to cut out notches here. And I'm going to show you a little trick to how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and measure along each of these frames, the distance along the frame, divide by 5, and then mark out what I just marked out. Okay, so what I've done now is I have marked where I want each of the topside battens to go, and they're equidistant from the upper and lower topside battens. I've done this on every single frame.
Next, I do the same markings on the stem. And then I notch out the stem.
So I'm just going to notch out 1, 2, 3, 4 notches. I'm just going to use my handsaw method.
Remember that African mahogany topside batten? Well, I split it down the middle with a table saw and used that as the battens for my guides. I then clamped the battens on the upper and the lower edges of each of the notches that I marked. I tried multiple techniques to temporarily attach these batten guides to the frames, using finishing nails, flathead nails, and even screws.
By the way, I'm using screws. I tightened it too much and I split one. I thought screws would be better than a nail, but maybe not. So I've tried a number of different ways to put these batten guides onto the frames for cutting out the notches. And ultimately I've tried screwing, I've tried nailing them in, and I just want to show you the method I have found works best. So I drew the line, so I picked one line. Here I picked the bottom line, and I've lined the lower batten up to that line. And I've got it all the way across, so I know it's straight enough that the real topside batten, 1.5 inches wide, will fit in here. So the next thing I do is I take a drill bit, a little bit smaller than the nail. Then I take nails. These are 1.5 inches long. They can probably be a little bit shorter, but I couldn't find 1-inch nails. And when I was putting them in, you find that, sometimes they stick too hard. I bend over the nail. Other times they're too hard to get out. I found that screws ended up cracking it. Finishing nails ended up bending over. So there's an online company in the US called Fairwind Fasteners, and they sell this thing called Screw Lube. And it's probably a lot like beeswax or something, but it's a lubricant that I put the nail in. And then it makes it a whole lot easier to put all these things together. Once I have the lower batten in place, Here I take, this is actually, I cut this off from my scarf joints, but it's just one of the real battens at 1.5 inches wide. And I put just a little bit of masking tape on it just to make it a little bit bigger. So I get a tight fit, but I can fit my boards in. So I put this in place, and now I know that when I cut this notch out, 1.5 inches wide batten should fit in here. So I repeat the same exact step. I'm all done. So that's how I'm going to continue down the boat, but I thought it'd be good to show you my preferred methodology. What I want you to see is with the notches cut and I put this batten, this will be the, I guess, the top of the second to the top notch. You get two things. You can see the shape when I put this batten in place, but now you also get a good view of the gap. So you know that when you cut along this batten, you're gonna get the proper depth of each frame. That's frame 2, you see frame 3, frame 4. But there's another piece that comes clear, is that I drew the lines, and when I put all of these things along the lines, some are above and some are below. I didn't get my lines right, but these battens help you not only know the in and out that you need to cut, but they also tell you how a straight batten would want to go through with the proper curvature. So there's some real benefit to putting these in. Okay, just for illustration purposes, I just put the lower or this upper side batten in place rather than putting two of them, so I can show a little bit better how you cut. And here on frame 1, what you see is how big that gap is. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the saw blade depth so that it cuts 3/8 of an inch on the aft side. And when I run it along here, it's gonna be a much deeper cut on the forward side. And you see we've got these kind of gaps that really this thing auto sets the depth when you do it this way. Here's frame 4. In the middle of the boat, they're not really big gaps. But what I'm gonna do now is show you back here at the back of the boat, there is a 1/8 inch gap off the back. So if I want this to go 3/8 inches in, and this is a 5/8 inch thick guide rail for cutting, 5/8 plus 1/8 is 6/8, plus 3/8 is 9/8. So that's 1 inch and 1/8. So I'm gonna set the depth of the blade 1 inch and 1/8 to cut through here. So it's gonna be exactly 3/8 of an inch on the forward side and be deeper on the back side.
In this schematic, I'll demonstrate how the cut will work on frame 4, and then I'll show you actually on the boat. With a 1/4 inch gap between the batten and the back of frame 4, when I set the depth to cut 3/8 inch deep on the back, I actually get a 5/8 inch deep cut on the front, which naturally shapes the notch that I need.
I'm gonna go perpendicular from
The batten.
and it looks to me 1, 2, 3/8. So 5/8 plus 3/8 is 1 inch. So I gotta go 1 3/8 on this. Okay, it fits. I think that one's okay.
The plywood did not snap off as easily, so I had to use a chisel to clean it up. The topside battens need to be flush to the front edge of the transom. Therefore, I set the cut to 5/8 inches deep into the front side of the transom. While this method worked well for each of the frames, on the transom I had to come back with the mini belt sander to get the proper depth and angle. This is because the curve of the transom required me to bow out each of the battens a bit further than they would in a normal setting. Here I'm just showing the notches being cut out on frames 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here we see the starboard side of the boat with all the notches cut out. I really like the way Temptress curves at the very back. I promised Dan that I wouldn't use the mini belt sander. Therefore, I asked Brian to do it for me.
So what I'm doing here is putting this batten in where I've marked 1/4 inch offset so I can make sure that the frames are at the notches are at the right depth. And when you go toward the front of the boat, it's going to be this after backside. When you put it in, you want to have that line lined up on the aft of the backside, and it goes deeper on the front. And we are in pretty good shape here. All the way through.
After cutting the notches on each frame, the transom and the stem, the rest of the process is quite simple. We add unthickened and thickened epoxy into each notch. We put unthickened epoxy on the inside edge of the batten and place the batten inside of the notches, clamping them temporarily. And then secure the battens to each frame using silicon bronze screws. While this video focused more on notching the frames, in the next video we'll put more attention into how we clamp and bond the battens to the port side of the boat. Let's take one last look at the starboard side battens. Till next time, cheers.